So I'm highly caffeinated right now. I had a bit of coffee to keep up the energy levels. But yeah, hopefully you enjoy the talk. So let's get into it. So oftentimes when we think about Africa, we think about it in the context of slavery, exploitation, and generally that just brings a sense of sadness when you think about it, right? So what I'm here to do now is to change that narrative, right? And the one thing that I want us to do is to think about change in the sense of blockchain, right? And how we can use that technology to alleviate modern day slavery and potentially also alleviate exploitation and now bring a sense of joy when you actually think about change, you know? So just a quick one on who I am. I'm Omphile Matheolane. Oftentimes people call me Omphile because of the PH, but it's Omphile. And I'm basically a developer by trade. Started off my career as a developer and basically worked my way through the banking industry in a number of roles. Currently, I play the role of a biz DevOps lead at one of the banks, and I've basically been in multiple roles within basically South Africa's top banks. I've been in the payments teams, trade finance, and a whole number of roles and teams. So basically that's it about me. So just a quick disclaimer before we get into it. So first of all, this is my first talking engagement. So round of applause for that. Cool. And also there won't be any demos in the session. So if you came into the session with an expectation of seeing live demos or solutions, unfortunately, I'm sorry, that won't be here. And this last part here is basically the fact that there is no strangers here. And essentially, strangers are friends that are yet to be met. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to have a conversation with you guys as if you're my friends. So feel free to engage. You know, at the end of the session, there's always going to be time for questions. So just feel free as I go along the presentation to kind of like make those mental notes of the questions that you might have. Cool. So what is the theme of the talk, right? So when I actually got the offer to actually come and present here, the first thing that came to mind was, what do I want to talk about? Why I want to talk about it? And actually how are we going to go about implementing what I'm going to talk about, you know? And over and above that, the talk in itself is, in a sense, visionary, but yet grounded on real-world applications. And hopefully throughout the course of the talk, I'll just give you a sense of how you can go about implementing some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. So also just a quick background on what inspired the talk. So my younger brother is actually into farming, right? And he's a farmer at heart, and he's a farmer by profession, you know? And because of my love for my younger brother, I found myself immersed in this world of agriculture and how I can merge, you know, my profession of being a techie into his profession of being an agriculturalist, you know, and a farmer. And as I was in that endeavor to actually explore and think about how I can merge these two worlds, I found myself in a rabbit hole where I kept on trying to discover more and more potential around blockchain and the potential uses of blockchain. And one of those was around resource management, which is what I'm going to be covering today. So just with a quick show of hands, or you can blink twice if you don't want to show your hands. Who here has a smartphone? Cool. And who here loves chocolate? Cool. So just some interesting facts. So Africa is basically just a treasure chest, right? And we have tons and tons of minerals that we are literally standing over. And some of those minerals, just out of interest sake, is that 51% of the world's magnesium is actually found in Africa. 77% of the world's cobalt is found here in Africa. 80% of the world's platinum is found in Africa. And we actually contribute to the market with those specific percentages. And 50% of the world's cocoa is actually coming from Ivory Coast or Ghana. And so basically, if you think about it, the chocolate that you've probably eaten, was farmed by one of the farmers in Africa. And the cobalt that is actually found in rechargeable batteries probably comes from Africa. So there's actually quite a lot that we contribute towards the world and the greater source of innovation. So your Teslas actually use the resources that come from Africa, And on the next slide, I just want to touch on why Africa finds itself in a position that it finds in, that we are contributing so much to the world, yet we are the poorest. And I'm actually going to make a bold statement here and say that Africa is the richest continent, yet we are the poorest. Sometime last week, I was on an 18-hour flight and coming from Europe and flying over Rwanda, came via Lusaka as well. And on that flight, as you look down, you could see, some mining activities happening, but yet around the communities don't actually reflect that. You wouldn't say that there's actually a multinational company that's mining in that area because of how poor the surroundings look like. And one of the things that actually contribute to that is obviously unfair trade deals. So take, for example, the cocoa farmer that's in the Ivory Coast. The total value of the chocolate bar that you actually find in the retail, they actually just get 6% of that total value. So you can think about the person that's actually making all the effort to plant and, harvest this particular product, actually just gets 6%. That's a bit sad, right? And the next one here is obviously economic exploitation. So with this one, it's obviously in terms of multinational companies that come into countries, and what they then do is that they trap, either communities or governments in these long binding contracts that they cannot get out of, And essentially by so doing, they actually now start exploiting that specific country or that region or that community for its mineral resources, but there's nothing to show for it if you actually take a look around. And the next one, I think, is quite obvious in the sense that Africa is obviously riddled with political instability. And because of that, you find that there's quite poor governance when it comes to how we actually manage our resources. And that's the one thing that blockchain aims to alleviate or solve. So blockchain to the rescue. This is where now blockchain comes into play, and this is where the thought of the talk actually came about. I was actually sitting and thinking that when you think about blockchain, what does it actually have to offer in terms of resource management and in terms of offering some sort of solution that can get us to have a transparent view of the minerals that we mine in the country and minerals that we basically mine within Africa as a whole. And obviously, I'm assuming that most of the individuals here are techies and devs, and chances are most of you know what blockchain is. But just for the benefit of those that don't know, essentially blockchain is a distributed digital ledger. So think about blockchain as a notebook that I have, and this specific notebook, I've given everyone in the room a copy of that notebook. So the minute that I want to make a transaction, there's what we call consensus mechanism. And what that is essentially proof of work, proof of stake. That's what actually goes into validating transactions within the specific notebook. And by so doing, before I can even make a transaction, everyone in the room first needs to validate that, first of all, do I have the money to actually make that transaction, or do I actually own that specific asset before I can actually sell it? So I can't just go about making a transaction without you guys actually validating it. So that's in a nutshell, in layman terms, what blockchain is. And just to kind of like put it into, a much more visual picture, say, for example, we have two individuals, right? We have Peter and Kenny, who are both part of this specific network or blockchain. And now Peter wants to sell a specific digital asset to Kenny. But before that transaction can actually happen, it first needs to be verified, right? And everyone in the specific network, what they would then do is that they would first validate that Kenny, first of all, has the money to actually buy what Peter is selling. And also everyone in the network has the ability to check and verify that Peter actually owns that piece of asset that they want to sell. Once that verification is done, then what happens then is that there's two things. We first now need to link that transaction once everyone has validated that it's correct and it is as it should be. We go through a process of linking and updating. So the linking part essentially is we basically then link this transaction by hashing it out. So you have what you call hashes. So basically just in layman terms, just some sort of an encryption that happens to prevent any sort of changing to that specific transaction, right? And once that is done, we then update everyone's notebook with that specific transaction. So now everyone in the network will know that, okay, this is the transaction that happened, and this is who owns what now. Okay, cool. And in the next slide, I just want to touch on why blockchain in the first place, So blockchain offers a number of benefits, and one of them is traceability. And because of the ability for us to all see what is happening on the blockchain, it makes it quite easy for us to say that, okay, Peter was able to sell this asset to Kenny, and now Kenny is the official owner of that specific asset. So we're able to trace the movement of that asset across the specific network. That's the one benefit. Another benefit is transparency and immutability. So what is immutability? Immutability essentially is the inability to change something once it's been recorded. And from a transparency perspective, everyone in that specific network is able to see what's happening. So it's unlike opening a bank account. If you open a bank account right now, only you have that view of what's happening in your own bank account. Whereas now with blockchain, what happens is that everyone that's part of that blockchain knows how much money you actually have there, right? That's the level of transparency that blockchain actually offers. And then increased accessibility. So anyone can actually join a network. Anyone can join a blockchain network. It's not exclusive to say that, no, you need to be this exclusive executive that earns a certain amount of money to get access to the specific product or network. No. Anyone can just join it, right? All you have to do is just get into the network, buy an asset, and then essentially you're part of it, right? So that's the level of accessibility that blockchain offers. And then we have interoperability. So interoperability essentially is the ability for two networks to basically communicate with one another. And that's the one thing that I'm going to cover as you go into the slide, because just highlight that word interoperability, because I'm going to be talking about it a lot going forward. So what are some of the use cases for blockchain? So first and foremost, blockchain is not just cryptocurrency. It's not just Bitcoin. Let's not think about blockchain as, okay, Ethereum, I have this coin that I can sell and trade and do all these. No, it's not just about that. So I actually came across 3 startups that actually work on some incredible stuff and interesting stuff. So the one company is actually called Water Ledger. So what it basically does is that they have a system or platform that enables people with water rights to actually trade water rights. So say, for example, an individual that has a farm in front of a lake, right? And obviously that specific piece of land, I have the rights to that specific piece of water, right? That's my area. And someone further inland might be struggling with water rights. So what I can then do in that case is that I can sell water rights to a person that's further inland that's in need of water, right? So I can basically trade water rights in that manner when I'm using this platform. Another one is Everledger. So Everledger is critical towards mineral tracking. So what they do is that they basically track your precious minerals, so like your gold, diamonds, and then actually what they do is that they would then create this network where you're able to track and see the movement of minerals from one owner to the next. And then the other one is WorldCov. So WorldCov I actually found to be quite interesting in the sense that what they do is that they use off-the-chain information like your weather reports. And then what they do is that a farmer will come onto the network and basically take out insurance for their crops. And once they've taken out that insurance, what Water Ledger would, WorldCover will then do is that they would then automate payouts of insurance, right? And essentially how they do that is that rather than a farmer coming to the insurer to say that, hey, I had a drought the past 6 months and therefore all my crop has died, please give me a payout. Rather than doing that, what they then do is that they collect all this data and automatically they know that individual or farmer that's in a specific area, obviously had a drought and we are going to pay out. So they kind of like automate that using blockchain. So that's some of the companies and startups that actually use blockchain in a much more innovative and unique manner. And then the next one is around why interoperability is quite key to resource management. So it's all good and well that we have all these applications and systems that we run, right? But one thing that I identified was that we have pockets of isolation, right? And everyone seems to be creating their own system. Then maybe another company will create their own system, but there's never really any sort of consensus view or comprehensive view of how you actually track those minerals, right? Or from one network to the other network. So essentially what interoperability does is that it creates that unified view of how everything works from one network to the other. And the reason why I actually wanted to focus on this was that as much as we come into this talk interested on blockchain and maybe wanting to develop solutions, we should also think about how we're going to link each and every one of our solutions together so we can have this unified view of minerals and how we actually manage them, right? And interoperability in blockchain actually connects various stakeholders and systems across Africa, facilitating seamless data and value exchange. That's the key point of what interoperability is. And it is essential for managing cross-border or national resources like minerals and water, and it creates a transparent and efficient operations, right? And that's the key. That's the key on why we need to focus on it. So just to kind of like give you an example of a world without interoperability. So say, for example, we have mine A and mine B. So think of mine A as the one on your left, mine B as the one on your right. So both of these mines run on their own blockchain network, but they both operate within the diamond sector, within the same region, right? So now, the reason why it becomes an issue that those two systems are not connected is because, first of all, there is no comprehensive view of the national diamond production within that region, right? Because if I want to check as a regulator, what is the production from this specific mine, I need to go to this system, then go to this system. So I don't have that comprehensive view of, mineral productions in that specific region. So obviously then that talks to the regulation and compliance. There's difficulties in that, in the sense that I'm unable to tell whether mine A was actually following the correct processes in terms of actually mining its diamonds. Was it ethical? How do I actually track that? And how can I link that production from mine A to the production in mine B? Another one is there's actually barriers in comprehensive analytics. So say, for example, I'm a shareholder and I want to come, or an investor, and I want to come actually mine in a specific region. How do I get that overall view to say that, okay, all in all, this is, the region actually produces, say, for example, is quite rich in terms of diamond production. How do I actually tell that if there's all these multiple sources of information that I need to consult in order to get that information? So that it actually creates that barrier to that analytics part. And then I think the last part is obviously the inefficiency in resource allocation. So with that point, the whole essence of it is that resources from a diamond perspective, it's quite difficult to actually track that mine A was able to sell a specific diamond to a specific supplier. Or maybe mine B was able to sell a specific diamond to a specific supplier. You might find that both those mines are actually selling to the same supplier, but that specific supplier doesn't have an overall view of, there's actually quite duplication of effort in terms of how those mines actually integrate their systems to the one supplier that they actually supply. So that's in that case, what that's about. So the critical role of interoperability. So basically, it enables integrated management of resources across different countries and regulatory environments. And I think I spoke about that in the previous slide. And if we have to think about it, we just need to highlight the point of a regulatory environment and actually ensuring compliance within how we actually mine our resources, right? And then the next one is that it supports collaborative efforts between government, NGOs, private sector, and it's critical to handling shared resources. That's the one thing. So once we have systems that are linked together, it makes it easy for NGOs, government, to actually have that singular view or single source of truth towards how resources are actually mined and exported out of the country. So that's the one critical part of it. So now let's think about a world with interoperability. So how does that world look like, right? So say, for example, mine A and mine B are able to then integrate the two systems. Obviously, then we have a enhanced compliance and monitoring of those specific resources within that specific region. That's the one benefit of it. And then the other benefit of it is that there's optimized resource management. So from an optimized resource management perspective, it's all about that point of saying that we have a single supplier. How can we integrate our system to ensure that that single supplier does not have to interact with multiple systems? That's what that is about. And then the last slide is obviously about, the last point is obviously about the seamless information sharing that happens when it comes to sharing of information or sharing of the data that lies on that specific blockchain network. And then there's actually like a couple of technologies that enable interoperability within blockchain networks. One of those is blockchain bridges, and another one is atomic swaps, and the last one is basically around cross-chain protocols. So what blockchain bridges are, you should think about it as more of a custodian that sits in the middle of two networks, or two blockchain networks. And what that custodian actually does is that they are responsible for ensuring that this specific blockchain is not necessarily going to be able to reuse the same asset and not be able to store that asset and share it with mine, or basically network B, right? So that's intermediary and custodian efforts lies within blockchain bridges. And then from atomic swaps, what that is about is that it essentially works similar to blockchain bridges, but not in the same context. But what it does is that it works with hash time lock contracts. So hash time lock contracts are essentially like smart contracts. So I'll get into smart contracts later on because they're going to be quite critical to the conversation around blockchain bridges. So blockchain bridges are basically protocols that facilitate the transfer of assets and data between different blockchain networks. And basically what they do is that they close the gap between the technical and security complexes that might lie between two blockchains networks. So you think about blockchain A being a hyperfabric network and blockchain B maybe being an Ethereum network. So how do you actually merge those two networks, right? And that's what blockchain bridges actually helps with. And the key thing here is that those two networks obviously operate on a different level of security, operate on a different level of, the technical construct of it is quite different between the two. And blockchain bridges, what they do is that they act as that intermediary. So let's think about, blockchain bridges in a practical sense, right? So say, for example, you have mine A that wants to share a resource with mine B. The typical method that is actually used in the sense, it's called the wrapper asset method. So what this is that a specific digital asset would be sent to a blockchain bridge. This specific blockchain bridge, what it then does is that it will lock that specific asset on network A, or rather on the network that belongs to mine A. And then on the same hand, what it will then do is that it will mint the same value or same asset on blockchain B, right? And by minting it, it essentially means that a copy of the same value and a copy of the same asset is created within the Ethereum network in this. So let's just go back to the example that I made about hyperfabric ledger and Ethereum network. So now think about mine B as lying on the Ethereum network. So what it will do is that it will obviously then create an asset of equal value on the Ethereum network. And then on the Hyperfabric Ledger network, what it will then do is that it will lock that asset to ensure that no one on that specific network can reuse that specific asset, right? So when it comes to a point in time when mine B wants to take ownership of that specific digital asset, what they can do then is send a burn request to the bridge, and then what the bridge will do is that it will basically send a request to, in this instance, the Hyperfabric Ledger, and tell it to actually destroy that specific asset completely, right? So that's what that is all about. So with all that being said, we've obviously covered what blockchain is. We've covered how to actually get into the concept of interoperability and actually how do we merge those two worlds together. Now, you might be sitting as a techie and wondering, okay, cool, nice information, but when I walk out of here, I probably won't know what to do with that information, right? So how can we actually fast track the development of blockchain applications or functions? And the key thing that I want to highlight here is, all our CSP providers the top 3 CSP providers that we have actually offer what we call blockchain as a service. So think about blockchain as a service as essentially it allows you to build and deploy blockchain networks or applications, yet the CSP provider will handle the infrastructure level of things, right? So basically what it does in that sense is that it enables you to just focus on innovation rather than being tied down to the technicality of how to actually structure or create the specific network. So that's what blockchain as a service actually offers us, right? And like I said, it offers a quick setup and deployment of blockchain networks. And another one is that it reduces the cost of cloud-based services handling the back-end operations. So that's the one thing that it offers us. And then the last one is it secures and basically enables scalable solutions that grow with our operational costs. So in this specific instance, and if we think about cloud in itself, the benefit of cloud in itself is that it enables you to basically scale according to your demand. So the same concept also lies with blockchain as a service. So you obviously just pay for what you're using. You don't necessarily need to pay for like 20 nodes and you're actually just using 5 nodes in that blockchain. So that's what that is about. And then the next one here is going to be what services does AWS offer and Azure offer? So AWS offers what we call Amazon managed blockchain. So that's the service that they offer. That's the blockchain as a service that they offer. Azure has Kalido blockchain as a service. They also used to have something similar to the Amazon blockchain as a service, but they decommissioned that and now started going into the Kalido route. And both those networks use Hyperfabric ledgers and the Ethereum network. So that's the benefit of using those two blockchain as a service or CSPs to actually facilitate your development of a blockchain network. And because you're able to do that and use these CSPs, you're able to then integrate to the other services that the cloud providers actually offer you. So you're actually able to integrate your, your database services that they might offer you, querying services that they might offer you. So there's quite an endless amount of things that you can actually benefit by using blockchain as a service, right? And I think with that being said, around the technicalities, the key thing here is we should not be focused on the technicality and the security element of things. Let's push all that towards someone else. And that someone else is your CSPs, your Azure and AWSs. Let's push all that to them. Let's just focus on being innovative and thinking about, okay, I have a specific digital asset, or within my community, maybe because I, for example, come from the Northwest, where we are quite known for our platinum production. So now I can go and actually sit and think about, okay, since I come from this community or this area, how can I actually use technology to actually facilitate the management of resources within this specific area? So that should be my key focus on just thinking of high-level innovative solutions rather than being tied down to the technicality and security elements of how I actually go about implementing it. So just to show you how agile this presentation was and how last minute was, I added a quote there by John from this morning. And one of the things that I think hit home for me was that we all have a moral obligation, right? And by so saying, I feel that Africa has a lot of potential, right? We can by far surpass all the European countries, Asia, all these continents. We can surpass them, in terms of our wealth that we actually have. But obviously, it's because of the poor management of that wealth and the lack of visibility of those specific resources. We are unable to do that. We are unable to live to our fullest potential. And I think as individuals that reside in the continent and as individuals that reside in the country as well, we have that moral obligation to try and use our skill sets for the betterment of Africa. Let's not just use it for, yes, I'm developing an application for my employer and then that's it, and then you go home. Think about it outside of work as well. How do you actually get home and actually start thinking of those innovative solutions that actually better the environment that you're in? And that's the moral obligation that we have. And I think the first quote is obviously from our tech sensei, Steve Jobs. And he says there that innovation is the ability to see change as an opportunity, right? And not a threat. So let's see change as something that we welcome. Let's see innovation as something that we welcome. And let's run with that, and implement things that are actually meant for the betterment of the continent. So we've came to the last slide, and just a quick one. I think we touched this in the opening presentation this morning. You can rate this talk if you want, and then if you want to connect with me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's my LinkedIn URL right there. And hopefully you enjoyed the talk, and you leave here inspired to actually make a change in the continent, and actually hopefully in 5 years' time I'll read about you in the newspaper to say that you've done something. So please go ahead and conquer. Thank you. Cool. Any questions? Sure.
Yeah, I've got a question. Just in terms of, have you given much thought in terms of practical ways? You spoke about using it for the management of resources. But practically, going into tomorrow, have you given some thought of even approaching organizations of saying, hey, we've got all of these resources. How do we use blockchain to better facilitate the trading of resources, allowing the person who's actually mining or doing agriculture to get a better piece of the pie, for example? Have you given much thought of ways of implementing, getting value?
I think from a practicality perspective, it all boils down to, I think, from a legislative perspective, right? Obviously, I can go about, approaching companies, De Beers and all these mining companies and saying that, okay, guys, here's a concept of blockchain. Can you actually use it and implement? But I think the fear of the unknown in terms of, from a legislative perspective, is not something that's heavily regulated to say that, okay, you know what, we can use blockchain to actually have that transparent view of how minerals maneuver within the, from market to market, So I think if I was to actually step out of the room, I think the first thing that I would actually think about in terms of approaching, your mines, I think would actually have to be stressing the point of the benefit of, what they have to benefit from blockchain as a technology in itself, right? I know that there's some companies like your SAB, for example. I think they are quite interested in using blockchain from a supply chain perspective, but not necessarily from a mining or resource management perspective. So the application of blockchain is already there, but not necessarily in the concept of mining and resource management, So, yeah. Cool. Yeah, sure.
What is it about blockchain on its own, right, that you think without having to say, oh, you could just spin up a simple instance and do the same?
Yeah. I think the key thing for blockchain is obviously that whole concept of immutability, right? When you think about a database, anyone can go into a database and change it. If you have rights, you can just go and change it. And from an audit perspective, obviously, anyone with this correct rights to actually access data on a database can go about and do that. Whereas now, if you think about it in a construct or concept of blockchain, every single change or movement of assets within a network is recorded. And that level of immutability, the inability to actually change any of the data, and also the level of transparency that blockchain actually offers us, I think is actually quite key in the communication of why we actually want to use blockchain, right? It's all centered around data. Yes, data I can host it on an Excel spreadsheet, I can host it on a database, but we need to actually think about why the concept of or the technology of blockchain actually came about. And it was actually came about because of that whole element of being able to allow everyone to actually have that single view of information, and also being able to track that no one can be able to change information without the next person knowing. So I think that's always the key thing that we want to actually push when we communicate the benefits of blockchain, rather than just going to a database and just spinning up any database. Cool, I hope I answered your question. Okay, cool. So cool. Thanks, everyone. Feel free to come by, have a chat if you want. Sure. Thank you.